Hey everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with HistoryThroughCards.com. Hope you're all doing very well today. So I was going through a few articles quite recently and I came across one on this gentleman right here, Larry Legend. And in fact, I never actually heard Larry Bird referred to as Larry Legend during his career. That must be something new or something. I've always heard the hick from French lick, but Larry Legend isn't something that I ever heard growing up. I did watch plenty of Larry Bird and the big three Celtics. Just being from Boston, I really couldn't help watching the Celtics back in the 1980s. If you grew up in the 1980s in Boston, as I did. The funny thing is that I never collected basketball for the most part growing up. I was always baseball. So I did see this card, but a lot of my friends said, you don't want that card, it's pretty nasty. And they also said the same thing about star basketball cards. Throw them in the trash, they said. And unfortunately, that's really what we did. Um, to my regret, 30 plus years later. Anyway, um, I passed this card up time and time again, just because I kind of thought it was not a very good looking card. As I grew older, I started to really like this card quite a bit. The 1981 Tops, it's his first solo card. I don't like his rookie card. I probably will never buy it, even if I did have the money for it. I still wouldn't want to add it to my collection. I know it's a big card, and a lot of people do really like it. I just happen not to, so I really kind of chose the 1981 Tops. I happen to now like the 1981 Topps set. There's a lot of great Hall of Famers that you can add to your collection really cheap. It is kind of on the cheaper side, but it also is a set, I think, that really kind of dogs a lot of vintage collectors. Now vintage, right? So I'm not really comfortable with that one either. The one thing that you'll probably notice when collecting these cards is the borders are very thin, and there's a lot of centering issues. This card has a little bit of centering issues, but I didn't pay a whole lot for it. As well, modern goes, I may have paid a little over $60 or $75 for it. And for the longest time, this card really wasn't worth what it is today. So I'm kind of surprised. As you can see on the back here, it's pretty clean. Very nice card, in fact, overall. But I don't really have any other Larry Bird cards in my collection, and I don't really like to settle on just home sports for me. I like to branch out, you know. So that's the only Larry Bird card I have, and I did find a really interesting article about Larry Bird when he first came up to the Celtics, or how that actually occurred. I was too young to know how this really came about, and I was really surprised. And I wanted to show this article to you guys and kind of get your thoughts and takes on it afterwards. So stick around, and here it is. This is from the Indianapolis Star, Indianapolis, Indiana, June 26, 2022. Nancy Leonard on Pacers Larry Bird snub. By Dana Hunsinger Bensbo. Indianapolis. Nancy Leonard is cautious. She doesn't want to name names of those on the Indiana Pacers board back in 1978. Many, she said, had never held a basketball in their hands in their lives. They were successful local businessmen. Some were tennis players, but none of those 8 board members knew basketball like her late husband, Bobby Slick Leonard, Nancy says. Slick was the team's coach and general manager in 1978 when the Pacers traded the number 1 pick to Portland for guard Johnny Davis and the number 3 pick in the NBA draft. As it's well known now, the Pacers didn't use the 3rd pick to take Larry Bird, but Kentucky's Rick Robbie. Bird went to the Celtics with the 6th pick. It was a disaster, Nancy, 90, said from her Carmel home Tuesday. I'll never forget 1 second of that draft, and it's something I haven't really talked about publicly. She hasn't talked publicly about what some call one of the Pacers' biggest mistakes in NBA draft history and how it came to be. Nancy was the team's assistant general manager at the time. Leading up to that June draft, Slick, Nancy, Pacers coaches, and scouts had gone to Terre Haute 5 or 6 times to watch Bird in his junior season at Indiana State. Even for me to see it, I couldn't believe his talent, she said. He was just perfect. When the team found out Bird was going to be in the draft, even knowing that they wouldn't get him for a year as he was going back to play his senior season of college, Slick and Nancy knew they still had to take him. Bird would be the next Indiana Pacer. There was zero question, Nancy said, until she went to the board. It's a wonder I didn't start crying. Nancy was sent to the Pacers board meeting to tell the men who Slick wanted to draft. I thought they would all understand, she said. Nancy told the board that there had been exhaustive research and scouting done. We really checked out everybody in the United States, she told the board. Bob knew what Bird would mean to the team. He would have a person who would really lift the team up. We want Larry Bird. Nancy will never forget the response she got. They said, well, we can't do that, Nancy recalls. I said, why? We'll never be able to get the money and we'll lose him, the board told her. At the time, the Pacers were in financial straits. The year before, the Leonards had held a telethon to save the team from folding in Indianapolis. Nancy tried to convince the board that Bird was good enough to take the risk, that money would pour in from season ticket sales if the Pacers drafted him, and even if the Pacers ultimately couldn't get the money together they needed to sign Bird, they would be able to trade him for 2 really good players. I couldn't make them see how valuable he was, she said. We could have had a wonderful gold coin in the palm of our hands. The board wasn't swayed. Instead, Nancy said, they were panicked. Then one board member gave Nancy what she calls an unbelievable reason for who he wanted the Pacers to take. One guy said, well, my daughter is going to Kentucky, and she said there's a player there every bit as good as Larry Bird. It is Rick Roby. Nancy said, it's a wonder I didn't start crying. I knew what a huge thing this was to lose Larry. This was so huge. We gave Bird away. On that draft night in 1978, when Roby was announced as the Pacers' pick, the Celtics were shocked and then erupted. Boston had a celebration right then. They started screaming and yelling and clapping, Nancy said. I thought we just ruined the franchise. But for Bird, she admits, he was going to a perfect team. Larry could not have gotten any better situation for his career, Nancy said. He stepped into a veteran team that once had Bill Russell. That was a ready-made team waiting for a special find, and it was Larry. It made his career. As for Roby, he wasn't anywhere near Larry Bird's talent, Nancy said. The Pacers traded Roby to Boston during his rookie season for former Pacer Billy Knight. We gave Bird away, she said. We totally gave him away. Bird quietly and not so quietly made sure the Pacers never forgot that. When Bird retired from the NBA in 1992 after an illustrious, legendary career with the Celtics, he seemed to take a jab at the guy the Pacers had picked instead of him. It didn't take me very long to realize I was going to be a great player in this league, Bird said in an Indianapolis Star article in August 1992 when he retired. The thing about it, I had Rick Roby guarding me, so I probably thought I was going to be a little bit better than I really was. Throughout Bird's NBA career, he took the snub to the court. He and his Boston team pummeled the Pacers almost every time they met him, going 32-5 against the Pacers in a 6-year span into the 1980s. Bird went on to become great friends with Slick, coached the Pacers, become president of the team, but when he was playing against them, he was ruthless. When I first came here as an assistant coach in 1984, when we were trying to build a team, I would watch Larry play, and I'd know he was going to lose to us. Then Pacers general manager Donnie Walsh said when Bird retired, there was nothing he could do. Physically, he could take over, and mentally, he was always one step ahead of us on the bench. It was the most helpless feeling. Steve Brunner wrote of Bird's grudge against the Pacers in the Indianapolis News when he retired. Bird went on to a storied career with the Celtics, winning more playoff games in a year than the Pacers have in their NBA existence, he wrote. Despite the disparity between the franchises, Bird seemed to take special delight in beating the home state team that let him get away. It came down to finances. To be fair, the Pacers board hadn't seen the Bird of the 1979 season, the Bird who played in the NCAA title game against Michigan State's Magic Johnson, and they passed on him in 1978. The draft took place before Bird's senior season at Indiana State. He had played 4 years of college, which made him eligible for the draft as a junior, but he wanted to play his final season at Indiana State. The struggling Pacers needed a player quickly, and the team couldn't wait around to see if it would have enough money to get Bird under contract a year later. At that time, Bird's stock as a prospect was not universally accepted as blue chip. The Indianapolis News wrote, so the Pacers went with Roby. Red Auerbach and the Celtics spent the 6th pick on Bird. Professional basketball was never again the same. In newspapers at the time, Slick was politically correct, never outing his board at the season the Pacers passed on Bird. Since day one, we've been operating on a shoestring budget, he told reporters. It came down to finances. When Bird retired in 1992, Brunner asked Walsh what would have been, what might have happened had the Pacers taken Bird. Where would we be, Walsh said. You can only guess. In hindsight, those things always seem obvious. At the time, it's never that obvious. If anything, what you have to do is give Red Auerbach credit for having the foresight to make that pick 1 year ahead of time. And Nancy says, give the Pacers a black mark for not having the foresight. Bird was at the draft. Oh my gosh, he was right there for us to take, she said, and I have to live with that. I found another really great article too that I wanted to share with you. I thought that was really quite great, and this one's really excellent too. What if the Pacers had drafted Larry Bird in 1978 by Nat Newell? The Indiana Pacers won a coin flip in 1978 to earn them the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. One of the top talents available was junior eligible forward from French Lick, who was playing his college ball a little more than an hour down the road in Terre Haute. Larry Bird told NBA teams he was returning to Indiana State for his final season of eligibility, putting the team that drafted him in a difficult spot. Sign him prior to the 1979 draft or have nothing to show for the pick. Bird had all the leverage since he could simply re-enter the 1979 draft. The Pacers didn't feel they could afford Bird due to the money owed to the NBA for joining the league from the ABA. The Boston Celtics, of course, selected Bird 6th in 1978 and eventually signed him to a 5-year, $3.25 million contract that made him the highest paid rookie in sports history at the time. The Pacers dealt the number 1 pick to Portland for the number 3 pick, selecting Rick Roby and guard Johnny Davis. But what would have happened if the Pacers had picked Bird and signed him, convinced he'd bring in more money than he cost. Here's a look at how Pacers history played out in a different slice of the multiverse. Pacers still trade number 1 pick. First, we're still making the trade if we're going to lose Bird, and at least we're going to have something to show for the pick in Davis. Trading for Davis was a shrewd move, taking a shooting guard who averaged just 9.4 points per game in his first 2 seasons in Portland and moving him to point guard, where he'd average 16.4 points and 5.4 assists in 4 seasons with the Pacers. If Bird was available at number 6, we can take him at number 3 and still get Davis. The Pacers signed Mickey Johnson as a free agent. The 6'10" Johnson still had an incredible season, averaging 19.1 points, 8.3 rebounds, and 4.2 assists in his only year with the Pacers. But while it's exciting to think of Johnson and Bird playing side by side, Indiana had to send Ricky Sobers to Chicago as compensation. There was no free agency in 1979 for signing Johnson. If we got Bird, we need another guard more than we need Johnson, so we're erasing that move. Sobers averaged 17.8 points and 6.5 assists in 2 seasons with the Pacers. His numbers dipped after leaving, but he'd average 14.5 points and 4.5 assists over the next 5 seasons, giving Bird's Pacers a capable backcourt. The starting center is James Edwards, a traditional post-up big man who averaged 15.7 points and 7 rebounds. We'll be happy to hold on to Edwards. We lose Billy Knight since the Pacers traded their actual draft pick, Rick Roby, to the Celtics for him. Knight is an all-time Pacer, and the 15 points per game he averaged in his second stint with the Pacers would have been useful in the backcourt, but with all the due respect to Knight, we've got Larry Bird. Another franchise-altering decision. The 1979-80 Pacers had Alex English averaging 14.9 points and 7.0 rebounds. He was a well-regarded player, but the Pacers dealt him during the season to Denver to bring George McGinnis back home. McGinnis had been an All-Star in 1978-79, but he had taken a step back to start the 1979-1980 season. Though the trade made some sense at the time, McGinnis wouldn't return to his previous level of production and would be out of the league 3 years later when English was well on his way to becoming a Hall of Famer in Denver. Here's what the Pacers' Slick Leonard said at the time of the deal. I hate to give Alex up, but I've never been able to trade for somebody and give up exactly who I wanted to give. It came down to this. We need a big, strong forward. We got plenty of small forwards. There's nothing out there in the draft this year and probably not next. And if you go into the free agent market, you've got to pay at least this price. Well, guess what? In this alternate reality, the Pacers have a big, strong forward named Larry Bird. Yes, English was a perfect match for Denver's fast-breaking offense, so maybe he's not averaging 25 a game in Indiana, but we're keeping him to pair with Bird, who would win Rookie of the Year by averaging 21.3 points, 10.4 rebounds, and 4.5 assists at forward. There's a surprisingly useful bench crew on this Pacers team as well. They added first-round pick Dudley Bradley, who would show promise as a defensive player, 2.6 steals per game, but never developed further. However, with Davis and Sobers, Bradley is an adequate reserve guard besides Joe Hassett, one of the early three-point shooting guards. There's also forward Mike Bantham, 11.8 points, 5.9 rebounds, 3.6 assists, and center Clemon Johnson, 6 points, 5.0 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks, who's an excellent complement to Edwards. How good would these Pacers be? It's hard to overstate the impact Bird made. The Celtics went from 29 wins to 61 when Bird joined a core of Cedric Maxwell, Tiny Archibald, Dave Cowens, and Chris Ford. Maxwell is an underrated player, and Archibald and Cowens are Hall of Famers, but were at the end of their careers. Ford was a very useful player, but not as good as the Pacers guards. Boston's best reserve was M.L. Carr. The Pacers went 37-45 without Bird, based on the Celtics' success. Why wouldn't a Pacers team of Bird, English, Edwards, Davis, and Sobers win 55-plus games? With Bird not available, we'll give the Celtics Reggie Theus, a very good 6'7" combo guard. Maybe he and Bill Fitch don't mesh, but maybe the Celtics coach gets a little more defense out of Theus. Those Celtics aren't winning 61 games, but they're still very good. Philadelphia is the team to beat, winning 59 games and eliminating the Celtics in the playoffs, led by a deep roster highlighted by Julius Erving. Are the Bird-led Pacers beating those Sixers? Maybe not, but they're in the thick of the East for the next decade, led by a pair of Hall of Fame forwards, Bird and English. The next season, the Celtics would trade for Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale. Even without Bird, they're a contender at that point. Philadelphia wasn't going anywhere, and Milwaukee emerged as a power behind Marquise Johnson, Sidney Moncrief, Junior Burgum, and Bob Lanier. Can the new-look Pacers contend without Bird? Without Bird, they've had their best NBA season, winning 44 games, adding another useful forward, second-round pick Louis Orr, and picking up veteran guard Don Buse and Martinsville Jerry Stitching. The bottom drops out for the real Pacers at this point. They can't afford to pay Edwards and trade a future draft pick for Tom Owens. The future draft pick would be number 2 overall pick in 1983 and positioned the Pacers to take Michael Jordan. But with Bird on the roster, money is flowing. They can keep Edwards. Does this team match the Celtics of Bird, McHale, Parrish? No. There are some defensive issues with the Pacers' new front line, but over the next decade, it's a 4-team race for East supremacy among the Sixers, Celtics, Bucks, and yes, Pacers. And ignore the fact that the Lakers would have won at least 7 NBA titles in a 9-year stretch in this alternate reality. The one thing that those articles didn't mention is that George McGinnis is in the Hall of Fame. His rookie card is in the 1972 Topps set, and Alex English's rookie card, I think that's the 1978 Topps. It's been a while since I've actually seen that card. Both of them are actually in a box, and I can't locate them right now. But there's a few other players here that I'm not terribly familiar with. They did mention Dr. J, and obviously he's got the 1981 Topps. Kevin McHale is also a rookie in the 1981 Topps set as well, and I think it's fairly affordable for the majority of people. Robert Parrish has a 1977 Topps rookie card, and that's pretty affordable as well. And I think the 1981 set is the first time that you're going to see him in a Celtics jersey, and I'm trying to forget that he was on the Bulls. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for stopping by. I greatly appreciate it as always. If you have any favorite cards that I showed here, or any favorite players, or any stories of Larry Bird or the Celtics or the Pacers, let me know. I always like to hear what you guys have to say. And until the next time, I will talk to you later. Have a good one. Bye.